All right, everyone. So we have finally embarked upon our last lesson in the marathon runner before your performance task and your final performance task. This is it. We need to figure out what happened to runner 0358. All right, and we're going to do that with this elaborate lesson. So we're just going to elaborate on things that we've been discussing and talking about and maybe some new concepts. All right, so this is a very important lesson. So make sure that you are locked in. All right. So our aim, what are the consequences of failure to maintain osmoregulation? Number one, for our do now says, if frogs taken from a freshwater pond are placed in a saltwater aquarium, what will most likely happen? So we're taking it from a hypotonic environment, freshwater, where the concentration of water is higher than the salt concentration, to a saltwater aquarium where the concentration of water is lower than the salt concentration. What we should expect is A, water is going to leave the eggs, right? Water is going to leave the eggs in a saltwater aquarium. Think back to uh, the osmosis investigation that we saw with the onion cells. When we added salt water, we saw that the cytoplasm, everything just kind of shrunk, right? That's because water was leaving those cells when we placed it into a saltwater environment. Think about how your mouth feels, the cells in your mouth feel when you eat popcorn at the movies, right? Popcorn is very salty, so it's going to cause a lot of water to leave your mouth. So, how do you replenish that water? You have to drink water in order to get back that water that you lost. Same thing that's happening here with these frog eggs when we move them from a freshwater pond to a saltwater aquarium. Now, if we look at number two, it says in some single-celled protozoans living in freshwater, such as the paramecium, contractile vacuoles are organelles that help to pump excess water out of the cell. Explain why a paramecium would require contractile vacuoles, while a similar protozoan living in salt water would not, right? So, an organism living in freshwater lives in a hypotonic environment. So H2O or water is constantly entering the cell or cells. And contractile vacuoles, I'm just going to abbreviate as CV, contractile vacuoles are needed to rid the cells of excess water, right? Salt water, however, is hypertonic. So water is constantly leaving the organism, rendering contractile vacuoles useless. If water is already leaving the organism in a saltwater environment, then there's no need for contractile vacuoles at all, because the function of contractile vacuoles is to pump out excess water. But if water is already leaving, you don't need help getting rid of anything that's excess. If anything, they need help retaining it, right? All right, so let's read part A. Can goldfish live in saltwater aquariums? We should know the answer to this already. For your birthday, your grandparents gave you a beautiful saltwater aquarium. It is an entire ecosystem hosting a vast array of colorful fish, plants, and even simple animals called sponges. The water in the aquarium is as salty as seawater, and the organisms that live in it are adapted to living in a high saline environment. Saline just means salt. Okay? So, what they're describing to us in this saltwater aquarium is that the concentration of salt is high and the concentration of water is low. Remember, these are always moving from high to low concentrations. So if I place a fish in there, think about what would happen if we placed a fish that's normally in something that has a lot of water and low amounts of salt, if we placed it in something that had high amounts of salt and low amounts of water. Let's continue reading. Your best friend decides that you need more fish for your aquarium and buys you a brightly colored goldfish. You aren't sure, but you have heard that goldfish are freshwater fish and don't live in the ocean like the rest of the fish in your aquarium. You tell your best friend that you are nervous about putting the goldfish in the aquarium. She is understandably upset and thinks that you don't like her gift. What kind of friend is this? She argues that the goldfish looks a lot like the other fish already in your aquarium, and the water in your aquarium looks just like the water at the pet store that it was already living in, right? So in a freshwater environment, so this is a saltwater environment. In a freshwater environment, we should know that the salt concentration is low, but the water concentration is high. Okay, so these are two different environments, right? Freshwater. So in our directions, you guys have to write, oh yes you do. It says you will need to make a decision on whether or not you will add the goldfish to your aquarium. Using evidence from the investigations in this 5E sequence on water balance and your background knowledge of biology. In order to provide a rationale for your decision to your friend, you will generate a clear model of what you think will happen if you put the goldfish in the saltwater aquarium. Okay? So your step one, look for evidence that will inform your decision. It could either be from what we just read, or it can be from the investigation osmosis that we did. It can literally be from any of the worksheets that we've spoken about. You're just going to put together a decision. You need to come up with a decision of whether you're going to add the goldfish to your aquarium or if you're not. And if you are or if you're not, you need to find your rationale using evidence, right? And then use evidence to provide a rationale for your decision that includes how feedback mechanisms allow goldfish to normally maintain internal water balance and how changing the salinity or salt concentrations of this environment will impact its ability to maintain homeostasis. So if we all of a sudden just started bringing fish that live in the ocean into ponds that are freshwater and freshwater fish into ocean water, how will that disrupt their homeostasis in water and salt balance, right? That's what you're going to use evidence to describe your rationale here. Okay, and I'm not giving that part away to you. So just take a couple of minutes, even 10, 15 minutes, however long it takes you. Okay, pause the video and then unpause and come back for part B, which we're gonna go over. So part B, breaking news, death by water. This is really important. I promise you, this is gonna come up really soon. This is a really, really, really important part that's here. All right. Emergency exclamation points here. Let's read. A woman in her late 20s was found dead in her home. The cause of death, drinking too much water. I know you probably didn't know this, but you can drink too much water and it can cause your untimely demise, just like this young lady in her 20s. Let's continue. This young woman decided to enter a radio contest to see how much water one could drink without going to the bathroom in order to win a video game console for her kids. Unaware of the consequences, she kept drinking more and more water at the radio station. Later at work, she started complaining of a massive headache and headed home. By that time, it was too late to reverse the damage, and she soon passed away. So she drank so much water that she ultimately had a massive headache and passed away. Let's continue reading. Right? And if we're talking about a massive headache, what body part are we talking about? The brain. So start thinking about maybe what could have happened in the brain as a result of drinking too much water. What could have happened to her brain cells? What could have happened to the blood that travels through the brain? What could have happened to maybe the blood vessels in the brain as a result of this? This woman suffered from hyponatremia, where the increase of water consumption in combination with little to no urination created a condition of low sodium levels in the bloodstream. So she diluted so much sodium inside of her bloodstream, right? That's known as hyponatremia. She drank so much water that her sodium levels went down to a dangerous level in her bloodstream. Drinking games like these and other underlying medical conditions create conditions where the normal homeostasis mechanisms to regulate sodium water balance are interrupted. The elderly are also commonly at risk, making up the majority of US hyponatremia hospitalizations. Medical professionals importantly urge hyponatremia sufferers to never raise sodium levels too fast, as this could further cause further injury, excuse me. Right? So just because it's been diluted, yeah, that's terrible, as we can see with this lady, but you don't want to all of a sudden start intaking so much sodium at a really quick rate to try and balance it. That can actually cause more damage. It is suggested to return the sodium water balance at a slow rate so as to not overwhelm the bodily systems, right? We want to slowly get back to homeostasis. Okay? Now let's look. If I look at hyponatremia, I see that word hypo that I said reminded me of hippo. Okay? And hyponatremia is cells intake way too much water, becoming hypotonic, right? So H2O concentration is high in the cell and salt is low in the cell, right? So you create a hypotonic environment for your cells during hyponatremia, right? There's way too much water and way too little salt, just like we saw with the osmosis in the onion cells, right? Hypotonic, a lot of that water rushed right into the cells and it expanded those onion cells. Zooming in on hyponatremia. In order to understand what happened in the case of hyponatremia in this young woman, we must first understand the normal state. The kidney system, or hypothalamic renal feedback loop, you don't need to worry about that. The kidney system normally maintains water sodium balance within a narrow homeostatic range. When the cell receptors, called osmoreceptors, respond to elevated sodium levels in bodily fluids, the posterior pituitary glands are signaled to secrete antidiuretic hormone, right? So the pituitary gland is located in the brain. We see that these glands in the brain is going to release this hormone that says we need to hold on to water. ADH then enters the bloodstream and thirst is activated, right? So this is the thirst hormone, ADH. Essentially a message from the body is sent, it should say is sent, but a message from the body will increase fluid intake. Then the kidneys return enough solute-free water from the fluid in the kidney tubules to dilute the sodium levels back to normal. In the case of this young woman, the normal functioning of the kidney system was interrupted by the rapid increase in solute-free water intake. The kidneys could not keep up with the processing of water, and the feedback loop malfunctioned so that ADH was always turned on, right? So instead of ADH levels stopping once we've drank enough water, she drank so much water that it threw everything out of whack, and that hormone just kept getting released. So if that hormone is the thirst hormone, that means that her body was always being told that it was thirsty. And if she's always being told that she's thirsty, she's going to continue to drink more and more and more and more and more and more water until her cells literally seem like they started to die. So our guiding question is, why/how did this woman die? Be sure to include the following vocabulary terms in your response. The brain, right? The brain, you have to include hyponatremia, ADH, osmoregulation, water, salt, kidneys, urine, balance, and hypotonic, all of which we've spoken about in this reading, but you are responsible for explaining this, all right? And start thinking about, how does this relate back to the marathon runner? Why might this relate back to the marathon runner? Okay, so that's the elaborate. Study, study, study. Bring your notes for your performance task on osmoregulation, because right after that is your final performance task. And you will have to write, you will have to do our little diagrams that we've done for the past 4 performance tasks, and it's going to encompass everything that you've learned. So study, 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 and bring your notes with you and make sense of everything that we've done. You guys are absolutely amazing, and we cannot wait to move on to Unit 2, which is humans versus bacteria. Yay! I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one. Bye.